So I'm going to be speaking about AI attitudes among marginalized populations in the US today. And the motivation for this research is really around algorithmic bias and harm. So we know that certain minoritized groups, can you hear me with the noise back there? Yes, or I can, I guess, lean over. So we know that certain minoritized groups experience substantial harm resulting from AI and algorithmic bias. And this is particularly related to things like gender and race and disability, as we've seen in a lot of prior work. And I want to give one example that is related to some of my research group's prior research. So we had done this qualitative study. It involved a lot of design workshops with about 44 trans and non-binary people. And we weren't really meaning to study AI in this study at all. It was more about augmented reality. But people in this study were really bringing up AI quite a bit on their own. And so we ended up having an entire section in the paper about AI hesitancy. And we found things like there was a broad discomfort with AI, especially relating to things like uncertain data practices. And this was things like people talking about AI systems perpetuating systemic biases against trans and non-binary people, lack of transparency around what data AI systems are trained on and how, and then also these concerns about what will happen to their data after they use AI systems. And so because I was seeing this on a small scale in this qualitative research, I wanted to determine if this is something that is actually true more broadly. So that's what motivated this study, although we went beyond gender to also study race and disability. And I just wanted to talk about the value of what I consider obvious studies. So this to me feels like a very obvious study. I kind of knew what I was going to find before I did the research for some of the groups. But I think that we sometimes do actually need empirical evidence for things that seem relatively obvious. And then when you have this foundational work of saying, like, yes, this is empirically true, then that enables other scholars to be able to build upon it with more ambitious or more exciting studies. So I encourage you to also consider doing studies about things that you think might be true, but there's not any empirical evidence yet for. Okay, so we went into the study with 3 hypotheses. The first was that trans people will have more negative attitudes towards AI than cisgender people. The second is that racial minorities will have more negative attitudes towards AI than white people. And finally, that disabled people will have more negative attitudes towards AI than non-disabled people. And the methods here, we did an online survey using Prolific. Our sample size was 742. We did a US representative sample and then oversampled for the groups that we were interested in studying. And then for AI attitudes, we used a validated scale from Grassini, the AI attitude scale. And then the definition that we gave to participants was algorithmic systems that can perform tasks that would usually require human intelligence. But I will say that I think that what people are actually answering about for their AI attitudes is whatever they were thinking about the AI actually is, because I think that AI is very socially constructed at this point, and we have some future work that's looking at that. And just briefly, I wanted to note we are using trans and non-binary as separate groups because there are some people that are in both categories. There are some people that are one, but not the other. So that's why you'll see those separately in some of the graphs I'm going to show. So the first hypothesis we did find was supported. We found that trans people and non-binary people had more negative attitudes towards AI than cisgender people. And this was the results from 2 sample t-tests. For the second hypothesis, we actually found that the effect was in the opposite direction here. So surprisingly, we found that people of color had more positive attitudes towards AI than white people, and in particular, Black participants had more positive attitudes. And then finally, for disabled people, that hypothesis was supported. We found that disabled people in general had more negative AI attitudes than non-disabled. And then specifically neurodivergent people and people with mental health conditions had more negative AI attitudes. So prior work has found that women tend to have more negative AI attitudes than men. And this is something that we also found in this work. But prior work did not examine AI attitudes among gender minorities. So that was really one of our big contributions here, finding that gender minorities have more negative AI attitudes. In terms of disability, prior work has looked a lot at how AI technologies perpetuate biases towards disabled people, and there started to be qualitative examination of disabled people's experiences with AI. But our contribution here is really finding empirically that disabled people have more negative AI attitudes than others. Now for race, it's quite a bit more complicated here, because we did find that racial minorities, and especially Black participants, had more positive AI attitudes than white participants. And there's a couple possible explanations here. So first, Black optimism. This is a form of resistance by Black individuals and a way to exercise agency sometimes in response to oppressive systems. And there's also a theory called Afroskepticism, which acknowledges both this brutality of systems like AI systems, but at the same time recognizes existing capacities for things like joy and hope and play and freedom. And so this suggests an ambivalent balance of critique and hope in Black people's engagement with AI. And so I'm not saying here, I don't think our results are suggesting that AI is working really well for Black people and communities. I think rather there's this kind of hopeful openness maybe to technology's potential, even in the face of harm. And so I think that we really do need future research to look qualitatively and understand more about this ambivalence and this critique and hope around AI for Black participants. So we found that groups who are disproportionately harmed and targeted by AI, such as gender minorities and people with disabilities, also have more negative AI attitudes. And so when gender minorities and disabled people are often required to use AI systems, such as in workplace systems or healthcare settings, they may be doing this while they're actually harboring serious concerns and hesitations. And so these findings should really prompt reflection and critical examination of the common narrative that AI is inevitable and universally beneficial for society. So a couple of implications for policy. For AI systems, there really should be requirements to assess the impacts on marginalized groups. We would argue for participation from affected communities, but I do want to say that I don't think participatory AI is enough, because I think just involving users in designing AI systems, that makes the assumption already that AI is the solution. And I think we need to come into it without that assumption, because sometimes communities may not feel that way. And then, of course, we also need meaningful consent and user privacy. And in regulatory and design processes, we really need to recognize that AI is not always the answer. So some takeaways here. Ubiquitous AI adoption requires many people to use AI, sometimes without meaningful consent, despite significant disparities in attitudes based on gender and disability. So AI's extensive integration into all aspects of life is not actually a desired direction for all. Thank you.